Hi, everybody. Raina here, and welcome to Book Banter. Thank you so much for joining me again this evening. Tonight, I will be talking with Anita Felicelli. Um, she was going to be with us back in December, and then we couldn't make it work, and now she's here with us in March. It took 3 months, but we got it all back together, and I'm so excited that she's going to be here talking with us this evening. Anita is the author of How We Know Our Time Travelers. She is also the author of Chimera and the award-winning short story collection Love Songs for a Lost Continent. Anita edits the Alta Journal's California Book Club. Her short stories have appeared in the Massachusetts Review, the Normal School, and elsewhere. She has contributed essays and criticism to the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and other places. And in 2023, one of her short stories was performed as part of Symphony Space's Select Shorts, which snap, snap, snap for you. Anita grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, where she still currently lives with her family, and she served on the board of the National Book Critics Circle from 2021 to 2024. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Anita to Book Banter. Hi!
Hi. Thanks so much for having me, Raina. It's really great
Oh,
to be here with you.
thank you so much for joining me and for working with me to get it rescheduled because I read your collection back in December and I was like, I need to talk to someone about this, and Anita's going to be here, so I'm very glad to be talking to you about it today.
Yeah, definitely.
So I see that most of your work is short stories, like most of your books anyway, is short stories. Um, do you like have you written longer things? Was the short stories, is that your where you love like
I do
telling?
love the short story. I have written many much longer things, but the only novel length work that's out in the world is Chimerica.
Um, I I saw recently like you in the LA Times, you had like a book review in the LA Times, and I didn't I love how when I discover an author and then I like rediscover and rediscover more things that you've written, and like you've got your fingers in different spots. What how how does all that come together? Like where's your I want to know, what is your background, Anita? Let's start from the beginning. What is your writing background? What brought you
Um,
here?
well, I had wanted to be a fiction writer from age 5. Like it was the first career that I wanted, and it continued to be the primary career I wanted. I'm definitely a literary writer, and so I knew I wasn't going to be raking in a bunch of money from my books, and so I did other things along the way, trying to figure out what I could make money doing and support my literary fiction writing habit. So I was a litigator for a time. I worked in design for a brief while. I was a ghostwriter. I am now an editor. So I've worked in a few different spots, but my primary background really is fiction writing.
I I love the way you said that, your literary writing habit. Like that's it's like you're gonna come back to that. But 5 years
Yes.
old, that's pretty early to know for sure what you wanted to do.
I know, and it seems to me even now like kind of crazy. Like my I have children, and if they were like, "Oh, I'm going to do X," I wouldn't necessarily. I do have one child who wants to be a writer and illustrator, and I kind of
Okay.
believe him, actually, because it's so similar to me, like the pattern. But usually, I don't think that's like a norm. So,
I love that. My dad was a drummer. And so my grandparents, his parents bought him his first drum set when he was 5 years old.
mhm.
And I've always wondered, like, they passed before I was old enough to wonder and then go and ask them. But I've always wondered, like, what was it at like 4.5 that made you think this kid needs a full drum set?
That's awesome. That's a real show of support, right?
Absolutely. Like,
Like
I
you can
just
do
like,
this.
I love it. And of course, and it worked out. And that was what he loved. And that's what he spent pretty much his whole life doing.
And also
Um,
a drum set. I mean, that's like a loud that's a that's a commitment for a parent to be like, "Here, have a drum set."
for real. I'm like, here's a bucket and a stick. See what you can do. and then we'll go to, we'll
Yeah.
graduate up. But evidently, no, they were just like, here, have a full drum set. And it worked out. And then the question is too, like when you do something like that as a parent, would he have become a drummer if they hadn't
Mhm.
just all in full drum set,
Right.
when he was
Right.
showing interest?
I mean, it starts to be like the way your brain is wired, right? Like that's kind of how I think of it is like, so if you really make that commitment as a small child, even if you don't know what it is you're actually committing to, like your mind just starts to get wired around that idea, right? So
Well, yeah, and the idea
with
that something like
repetition.
that with an art, especially, that it is acceptable, that it is okay to do this with your life.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And I think that is really important, not just for kids though. Like, again, as a parent looking at that, like as a to your child, that's obviously real. But one of the things I love about New Orleans is that any art that you say that that's what I do, no one second guesses you. No one
Hmm.
questions it. They're not. But what is your day job? You know,
Right.
and I think that's very empowering, and it does. It
Yeah.
makes you think, I can be a writer, I can be a trumpeter, I can do this thing. That's okay. Like, no one is second guessing me, and so I don't second guess myself.
Right. Right. It builds a lot of confidence to have parents who are just like behind you in whatever it is that you do.
For sure. um so one of the things that I really loved about how we know our time travelers is that it's just a little bit, each story is just a little bit, I was going to say the word off, but I don't mean it in a bad way. There's an unsettling, like a little bit, not quite what you expected it to be. Um, and I love that. And I love that you use, it's not like a mystery twist. That's not the unexpected. You do use, is it time travel? It's a little bit of magical realism in each piece. And I kind of love that as well. I have not read your other short story collection yet, um, but is that something unique to this collection? Is that what you went into this, like, planning?
That's like my favorite mode of writing is to have
Okay.
sort of a little bit of fabulism and then some realism that grounds it. And it's most of what I write, although I am thinking about writing something more just solidly realistic right now because I've written so many things that are not.
Do you, when you go into writing a story, like, do you know that it's gonna have that in it, or are you just writing, like, are you writing kind of a straight story, and then you're like, wait, but what if I just don't follow that rule? What if I just move this
Hmm.
over? I know it just
Usually
depends.
I'm thinking about a story for a long time before actually putting it on paper. And so I I think by the time I do come to type it up, I have already developed it as something that had a fabulous element in it. So there is that process, but it occurs before I start typing anything.
Okay, so that's kind of fascinating. Like, do you outline or anything, or you're just doing all of that in your head?
I'm doing most of it in my head. I will make notes because sometimes something will occur to me when I'm out doing whatever, shuttling kids around or, some other activity. So I do make notes on my phone and on like receipts, but I but
Whatever's
I think the
around.
vast majority of it is going on in my head all the time. So
Yeah. Um. Okay, I'm trying to think of, like, I've come up with stories in my head, and then written them down. But, oh, let me ask you this: how long did this collection take you to put together? Like, to write all these stories?
to write the stories was about a year,
Okay,
but then there was revision after that.
of course. So when you're doing that, like, in your head like that, and you're not writing it down necessarily, do you do you have multiple stories happening, like, simultaneously? Do you use some other ideas?
I do. I often do have multiple stories running alongside, and usually I'll have short stories running alongside a novel idea that I'm also working on at the same time. So there's a bunch of different different things going
There's
on,
a lot
and
happening.
then the notes have to occur on the receipts because, like, I'm sure that I won't remember, this goes with that or whatever. So
So, okay, that's interesting because, like, if I'm reading a book and listen to it audio, or reading a couple books simultaneously, they have to be separate kind of books. Like I can be listening to a nonfiction and reading a fantasy, or you know, like they have to be very separate because I can't read like two murder mysteries. Won't remember, right, what's happening. But if you're like writing two short stories simultaneously kind of in your head, that's kind of fascinating to me. I've never heard anyone say that they were like literally putting it all in their head and then like putting it down on paper.
Yeah, I do think it's an odd way to work, but it's because I don't necessarily have long stretches of time within which to sit and write. And so I have to seize those times when I can. And I have to be, I like my mind likes making those stories. So it's doing that all the time. And then I finally get a moment where I can just sit and focus on my own work, for 4 hours or whatever and get it down.
Yeah, that is a luxury in life in general, but then you're trying to run a house and a family and all of that, the uninterrupted time. My uninterrupted time is usually very early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Do you have any, like a schedule, sort of, not really a schedule, but do you prefer morning or evening or afternoon or just when you can get it?
For a long time, I preferred morning, but I've been sleeping in excessively,
Ooh.
and so that hasn't really been happening. And it's been night after the kids go to bed, has been my time for the last probably year and a half. Before that, it was solidly like 5 a.m. Wake up, work on my stuff for 2 hours, and then the rest of the day would come. But that hasn't
Yeah.
been the case these last months.
I'm I'm not good at like staying focused after everything is done for the evening. That is when I'm like that's when I'm all over the place.
Mm. Yeah, no, I really like that period of time right before falling asleep and right after waking up. Those two periods feel very good for fiction for me.
Mhm. Um what like which one of these stories do you have a favorite?
Um, I think probably the last story is my favorite,
Uh,
but I
okay.
also really love the title story. So that those two probably are my favorites.
That's you had an answer, which is great because that means you actually like that's a real answer. But a lot of people are like, I don't know, they're all
They're all
really
my
great.
babies.
Right. And I'm like, okay, yeah, they are. But um yeah, I love the like journal entry sort of style with the last story.
Oh, the letters, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The letters. I do really like that. Um I can't remember the name of my favorite one. I should have
What's the
bookmarked
plot
that.
of it?
Should have booked. It's in the beginning. It's she's talking about um she doesn't know. Okay, it's when it's I did find out. Assembly line because she's like kind of lost in her own
Hmm.
life. And so in this story she is there clearly and people know her, but she's sort of discovering her own life as she's moving through it. And I just was kind of what I loved is I was really on that journey with her, and I'm like, I don't know whether she's not. We don't know why, right? I don't know why as we go through, but I've felt that a lot, being sort of not that I don't understand what is on my own desk, but that sometimes you feel kind of lost in your own life.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I don't know, like, did that come from that, or was that just completely? Am I making that up? Am I reading into that
Oh
story?
no, I love if you're reading into that. It started as another story about it was about men who can't let go of their first girlfriend, which was something that I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking about in college a lot because I was dealing with that kind of thing a lot. And so it actually started from there, and it was a realistic story that I wrote for a workshop about a guy who finds a woman who looks like his ex
Mm-hmm.
and tries to groom her into becoming his ex. And so that's sort of the realistic story that which is still kind of creepy. That was underpinning this story that became more like obviously creepy. So
Well, that's interesting too because just like I think there's a lot of people who will say that they have a type, right? But I always wonder if the type is really just like their first girlfriend or boyfriend or their first
Right.
like, then there's this nostalgia and there's memories and there's whatever with that person, and so you're sort of like, whether you're consciously, this sounds like this person might have been consciously grooming the person, but or consciously
Mhm.
or unconsciously, like all of a sudden this person kind of looks like that person and they kind of like do the same types of things, and then they have a type, but is it just you've created it out
Yeah,
of
and I think
that?
like that was weighing on my mind. I was like in the breakups with my first boyfriend, and just sort of navigating college, and like those are the kinds of things that people are thinking about when they start being in a serious relationship. So
They should probably think about it more. They should probably be more self realizing in that, if you're more aware of the fact that this person is just kind of like that person and maybe not, like if you wrote down what is it that you really want in a person,
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
not. But I love how you get to play with that, right? Fiction allows you to just play with that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can go to like much more bonkers concepts with fiction than if I had written that as like a essay, or whatever. So
Oh yeah, then it's not like, then you're like changing names to protect the innocent sort of
yeah.
situation. And when it's fiction, you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. This is nothing like what has happened to me.
Mhm.
But then you throw in the little bit of like, that little bit of mystery is the magical bit that you throw in, instead of it being like something. It just is like she does not know
Right,
what
right.
things are, and I love that just sort of magical mystery part. Um, you said it took you like a year to put these together. Were you writing them knowing that you wanted to put them into a collection, or just were you just writing your stories?
Well, the first couple I just wrote as stories, and then I started to see sort of this common thread of time and these common thematic threads of time and climate change, and sort of thought, I actually am like obviously already kind of obsessed with this. Maybe I'll just keep going in that vein. And so then I started writing more stories, like aware that they were going to be in a collection. But the initial thing was just writing the stories and seeing at some point there was a pattern in them that I would want to put them together as a collection.
Yeah. Did This is always one of those questions, but like, were there ones that didn't make it?
No, there weren't ones that were specifically written for the collection that didn't make it. There was a story that I thought about that kind of thematically fit that I had written before, and it was like a very concrete, realistic story. And I wasn't interested in revising it, was the main reason I didn't end up putting it in here, because it just didn't fit tonally with the other stories. So
Right, like you would have to like shoehorn it in there, and you're like, I don't
yeah,
need
and it would
to.
just feel fake. So
It'll get its moment some other time, some other place.
maybe.
You're like, no, that's just in the drawer. Ooh, I always forget like I have these on. What are some like short stories that you have read, like that have influenced you? Is there an author or short stories?
You know, there are I wouldn't pinpoint specific short stories per se
Mm-hmm.
that have influenced me. I mean, honestly, like I think with this collection, I wasn't looking as much to like my contemporary fiction writers, even though I love a number of contemporary fiction authors. I Hold a Wolf by the Ears by Laura Vandenberg. I love Get in Trouble by Kelly Link. There's a bunch of contemporary collections that I feel like my work is maybe sort of adjacent to. But I think with this collection, I think I was just going back to like, something like The Lady or the Tiger, the story
Mm.
of a guy who has to pick which door to go into either, and one of them there, he'll find a woman, and the other one he'll find a tiger, and like it ends on an ambiguous note. And I think that sort of like carries through um, these stories. And I think like a bunch of novellas influenced these stories. Like Adolfo Bioy Casares' The Invention of Morale
Mm-hmm.
was a huge influence on this book. And I use the epigraph from his book, sort of as a way of like paying homage to to him, because I didn't actually realize how much he influenced the collection, and then I happened to be, pick it up, even though I love the book, I'm not thinking about it all the time. But then I picked it up and I looked at it and I'm like, wait a second, like there's a quality here that's so similar to what I'm trying to do in my stories, and I wasn't consciously trying to put him in or whatever, but that was the case. And then I think Anna Kavan is another author, like a modernist author, whose novellas kind of influenced the collection. Like Ice is one of her books.
Yes.
That I think sort of it's kind of an apocalyptic narrative. It kind of influenced my sense that you could write a whole thing sort of obsessed with apocalypse in this particular dreamy kind of way.
Yes. So I have read that, and I love like similarly where you can follow like the same vein. You can just stay in that same kind of world, but write different stories that have that same feeling to them.
Yeah.
So Linda is asking, do you have a special place you like to write?
I like to write on my couch. I do pretty much all my work on the corner of a gray couch in my living room. I work from home, so that's where I'm doing my paid work, and that's also where I'm doing my fiction writing. And then I sometimes write in bed too. But
do you need quiet while you write, or do you like have the TV in the background or music or something, or like does it matter?
I need quiet to edit, but when I'm first writing, it doesn't make a difference one way or another.
That makes sense. That edit is when you really have to focus. When you're just getting it out there is when you can just like, that's sort of the creative bit where you just gotta let it come out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
It's
then,
just about letting it flow, I think, for me in the first draft. So
so she's also asking what or who inspired you to write. So you said you started writing when you were 5. Do you remember like what, right? Why, or what? Maybe somebody who inspired you or something that inspired you to continue that process.
there were these books by Maud Hart Lovelace, the Betsy Tacy books.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will know that. It's a series about 3 girls that are good friends, and it takes them. They live in Mankato, Minnesota, I think, and it takes them from age 5 through 20, 25 or something like that, through the wedding of the main character. And she always wanted to be a writer. So I think on some level I was like emulating this character that I really gravitated towards, who was the storyteller and kind of the ringleader of of the kind of the mischief that she and her friends got into. And that was kind of true of me as well. So I think that's probably where it comes from.
Some of those books are still very much available. So I put the comment to this Maud Hart Lovelace books in there. Those are great. I haven't read all of them, but I have read a couple, and I remember them just being very fun. And
Yeah, I really loved them. I mean, I reread them. I read some of them to my daughter, and yeah.
I love that. Like revisiting, books that you loved with your kids.
Yes.
Which worked out for me most of the time. Sometimes my son was like, "What is this?"
Yeah, no, my daughter also sometimes was like, no.
It's like this is for me. We reread Little House on the Prairie,
Mm-hmm.
and part of the way through it, I was like, "This is not how I remember it.
Right.
This is a different." This was mine. But like I'm having a moment.
Right.
He was
Yeah,
like,
that's a series where that happens for sure.
yeah, yeah. Um, let's see, what are you? What are you working on now?
I'm working on revisions of a novel that's set in a slightly dystopic near future. Um, and I've been through a number of rewrites on it. So I'm sort of polishing up this latest rewrite. And it's about 2 girls' friendship, and what happens when they're adults, which ends up being a little bit noir, a little bit dystopic. Some surveillance stuff goes on, so it's really fun. It's really fun to be in that world. Even though bad things happen, I enjoy it. So
well, and you get to like sort of craft it, so when and how, why the bad things need to
mm-hmm.
happen. So
Yeah, no, and I I love the first stage of writing something, and I really love after I've revised it a number of times already, and then polishing it up and tweaking it, and that last stage. It's the in between part where you're like having to give up things and make these big drastic cuts that are hard. So
There's okay. When you make cuts, do you literally like? Do they disappear? Do you delete them, or do you grab them and put them somewhere else? Because I grab stuff and I put it somewhere else, like in a random, just open a random document. Sometimes I'm like, I need that to be still not like I need it to not go away. Like I need it to still
yeah,
be like alive in the world. Even though now it does not mean anything, it doesn't fit with anything. It doesn't like I just like, but I need it to live. So
well,
do you
sometimes
just
I end up repurposing them. So I have a separate file that says cuts to sea smoke version, whatever. And then it all goes in there. And then I can go back to it if I realize like, oops, I shouldn't have taken that part was actually worthwhile, so.
okay. So that makes
Yeah.
sense.
So
I don't.
I can't do something as drastic as some people are just like deleting it and then that's the end. So
Yeah, like I know people who are just like, and then I threw it away, and I was like, I'm sorry, for real? Like it was just gone? And they're like, yeah, well, it was, it wasn't any good, or I wasn't gonna use it, or whatever. And I'm like, but it's so like I don't know. Maybe I'm just too sentimental about everything. It's not just the like writing, but like if I created it, it's worth something, and then I just like I need it to live over here in this document forever.
yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you're just making cuts sort of rapidly and like you just need to go through another a few more rounds mentally before you're like, this really is gone, or this actually could work in this other space, especially like flashbacks or whatever. Sometimes you remove them because you're like, oh, it's impeding the flow, and then you realize, oh, I could put this flashback over here. It makes so much more sense there.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of things just floating in my Google Docs that
Do
that
you write in a Google Doc?
so a lot of times I do because I can access it from everywhere, anytime, on any device. And
Hmm.
so a lot of times I will put it in there. Just out of convenience. I don't write enough where I need to get a special program for it. So I know there's lots of like I can't think of any of them now, but there are a lot of programs that writers use. But I don't write enough to need that. Um, I one day maybe
Yeah,
send
yeah. I
Google
think
Docs to
a lot of
somebody.
people use Scrivener. I tried to
Yes,
use Scrivener, but it wasn't working for me. I couldn't make it work on a technical level. So,
it seems to have so many options, which I'm sure is amazing
hmm.
if you learn how to use them all.
Right, right. Yeah. No, you have to be like willing to put in that time and usually by the time that I'm thinking of, right, actually typing things, I'm like, want to get going. I don't really want to be learning some new software. So,
Right, so that would be a whole separate thing. It's like learn the software day,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, exactly.
and then it's just like it's not fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's basically why. Like, it's not broken, so I don't like need to futz with it. Like, I
right.
just leave it. It's great. So I'm gonna drop the link to your book here in the comments, and from there, you can also click on Anita's name and find her other books. But how we know our time travelers is the link is in the comments right now. And I really just I'm excited. Like I'm really happy I got to talk to you today.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
This is
and everybody, you should go read Anita's book because it's awesome. But also, um, short stories are a really great way to keep reading. It's a really great way to get back into reading. I find that they're really great to like just keep moving forward. So many people ask me as a bookseller, they're like, oh, how do you read so many books per year? Or I never have time to read or something like that. And I just try to tell people like it's okay. You don't have to start with like a huge novel or something that you think you're supposed to start with or whatever. Grab short stories. Grab some poetry. Short stories are more of my go-to. And just read one, put it down. It's okay. Read another one next week. Put it down. It's okay. You will get through it, and you will have read a whole other book this year. And How We Know Our Time Travelers is a great one to get you started.
Oh, thank you, Raina.
Of course. Thank you all for watching. Linda, thank you for commenting. And Anita, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Of course. Bye, y'all.